Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss.
Hi, hello, dear students. Hope all are safe at home and healthy. So, this is zoology session. We are discussing split fine neat paper. So, the topic is neural control and coordination, and the other chapter coming from second POC is organisms and population. So, we have a set of 22 plus 23 questions coming from these two chapters, and we will start the discussion of the 45 questions which will be helpful for your competitive exams. So, moving on to the first question, the system that coordinate and integrate all the activities of organs in a synchronized way in human body are, and the answer is neural and endocrine systems. So, the system that coordinate, see what I see and what I talk, both should be synchronized. So if I see something and if I talk something, or if I teaching a chapter on respiratory system and if I telling some concepts related to nervous system, then it will become utter non-coordination, right? So this is what, if things have to go in a coordinated way, if I ask a question to somebody and if they answer something related to it, it becomes coordination. So this coordination is something like, if I ask a question, they hear with the help of their ears, they send the messages to the brain, they try to interpret what I know about it and then try to answer sensibly, then you call it as coordination. And integration, for this, at the cellular level, there needs to be the involvement in that particular function, which is called as integration of all the activities of organs is brought about by both the neural system and also the endocrine systems. So the other options given are only neural system. So neural system will control the whole of our body with the help of the nerves, whereas the endocrine system will control the whole of our body with the help of the various endocrine hormones. And respiratory and circulatory system, they only bring about circulation, and the respiratory system is concerned with only respiration and circulatory system is concerned with only circulation. But coordination and integration is brought about by neural and endocrine systems. So moving on to the question number 137. Question number 137, we have the specialized cells that detect, receive and transmit different kinds of stimuli are. Stimuli is to receive some, to perceive something, you call it as stimuli. So something we hear, something we talk. So before talking, we hear something. So all this we call it as, or we see something, we call it as stimuli. The things we perceive through our sense organs, we call it as stimuli. The messages we receive through our sense organs to the CNS can be called as a stimulus, and this stimulus is detected, received and transmitted with the help of specialized cells which are called as neurons. I hope you all know the structure of the neuron. The neuron consists of a cyton body and a long axon, which is also called as the nerve fiber, or the longest dendrite it is also referred as. So they will not only detect but also receive and transmit. They give it to other cells, we call it as neurons. So alveoli, they are the structural and functional units of lungs. Nephrons, they are the structural and functional units of kidney. Muscle fiber, it is the muscles are elongated, and each cell is, because each cell of the muscle is elongated, it is called as muscle fiber. So moving on to the next question, question number 138. The nerve fibers that transmit impulses from tissues or organs to the CNS are. So the CNS receives the impulses. Impulses means messages. So messages which are perceived through the sense organs to the organs and tissues, they move to the brain, right? So that part where the sense organs send the messages to the brain is brought about by afferent nerve fibers. So efferent nerve fibers are the one which carry the impulses from the brain to the muscles, and spinal nerves and cranial nerves. So they are also part of the peripheral nervous system. So the nervous system is divided into CNS and PNS, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, which comprises of the cranial nerves and spinal nerves. The spinal nerves. So the cranial nerves or the nerves will arise from the brain and move to different parts of our body, and from there they collect the information and send it to the brain. Spinal nerves, so they are the nerves which start from the spinal cord and enter into different parts of the body. So cranial nerves, there are 12 pairs. There are 12 pairs, and spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs. There are 31 pairs. The 12 pairs of cranial nerves are oculomotor, optic, abducens, trigeminal, trochlear, vagus, hypoglossal, glossopharyngeal, spinal accessory nerves. So olfactory, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 2 more. 2 more are facial and auditory. So these are the 12 pairs of cranial nerves which arise from the brain. The spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs. So they are cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. So cervical, there are 8 pairs. Thoracic, there are 12 pairs. Lumbar, there are 5 pairs. Sacral, also 5 pairs. And coccygeal, 1 pair of what is called as the spinal nerves. So there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves and 12 pairs of cranial nerves. So which are the part of the PNS. So moving on to the next question. So these are the nerves: oculomotor, optic, abducens, trigeminal, trochlear, vagus, hypoglossal, glossopharyngeal, spinal accessory nerves, olfactory, facial, and auditory. It is. Auditory it is. So spinal nerves, cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. So moving on to the next question. The somatic nervous system relays, just a minute, we'll go back and see. Yeah. Somatic nervous system relays impulses from CNS to, so it relays impulses to the skeletal system, skeletal muscles. It relays impulses to the skeletal muscles. So this peripheral nervous system is once again divided into 2, the SNS and the ANS. The SNS and the ANS. So the PNS is divided into SNS, the somatic neural system, and the other is ANS, that is autonomic nervous system. So SNS it is concerned, it takes the impulses to the skeletal muscles, whereas the ANS takes the impulses to the smooth muscles and the other tissues and organs along with the glands, glands particularly, smooth muscles and also the glands. So the right answer is skeletal muscles. Somatic nervous system relays impulses from CNS to skeletal muscles. So moving on to the question number 140. The granular bodies in the cell body of a neuron are fibers, nacelles, granules, granulocytes, proteins. So the granular bodies in the cell body of a neuron. So we know the structure of a neuron. So the cyton or the cell body is almost a star-shaped structure. Which is called as the cyton, and here we have the nucleus. Along with that, in this you have lot of nacelle granules. Certain granules called as nacelle granules are present. So these nacelle granules are supposed to secrete the neurotransmitters, thereby they play a very important role in the neurons. So the other options, the right option is nacelle granules. So the other options are fibers. So fibers usually we refer even neural, this part is also called as the neural fiber. We call it as neural fiber, or it is also referred as axon. So neural fiber or axon, it is called as nacelle granules. I told you it is present in the cyton. Granulocytes, we find them in the WBC. WBCs are classified into granulocytes and agranulocytes. So granulocytes mean those WBCs which have granular cytoplasm. We call them as granulocytes in WBCs. And proteins, we know they are the building blocks of our body. So now coming to the next question. Axon, short branches that project out of the cell body are. So this is the cell body and we have some projections coming out of this like this. So which are nothing but the dendrites. So these projections coming out of short branches that project out of the cell body, they are called as dendrites. They are referred as dendrites. And the second option, the right answer is dendrites. You know what is axon. So this nerve fiber, the longest dendrite is the axon, and at the end of the axon it branches. The terminal end of the axon branches, this part is referred as telodendria. This part is called as the telodendria, where it branches into to form further dendrites. So which is called as, which ends with a synaptic knob like this, So this part you call it as the telodendria, the terminal part of the dendrites, or at the end of the axon you have this telodendrites. Schwann cells, so the axon is covered by Schwann cells, which will also sometimes secrete the myelin sheath. These are called as the Schwann cells. So the answer for this question is dendrites. So moving on to question number 142. The synaptic knob in the synaptic vesicles in them contain. So the synaptic knob in the synaptic vesicles. So we know something about the synaptic knob. If you enlarge a synaptic knob, you can find the synaptic knob which has got synaptic membrane which has got infoldings like this, and you find tiny vesicles which in them contain chemical substances which are called as neurotransmitters. So this is called as the presynaptic membrane. So here there will be one more. This is called as postsynaptic. This is the membrane of the another neuron which is in very close proximity to this synaptic knob of this neuron. And here what happens, these neurotransmitters move towards the peripheral region of the synaptic knob, and further these neurotransmitters are released from this into the synaptic cleft. So the gap in between is called as the synaptic cleft. So all the three together, the pre-synaptic membrane, the synaptic cleft, and the post-synaptic membrane together are called as synapse, or referred as synapse. So now the synaptic knob and the synaptic vesicles in them contain the neurotransmitters. They are also nothing but the chemicals, but you cannot mark it as chemicals because you know they are particularly called as neurotransmitters. So that is the right answer. Moving on to next question, 143. The multipolar neurons are present in the options are embryonic stage, spinal cord, cerebral cortex, and eyes. So the multipolar neurons are present in the cerebral cortex. So cerebral cortex, it is the part of the cerebrum. We know that the brain has been divided into forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain. So the forebrain consists of cerebrum as one of the important part. It is the largest part of the human brain, and this cerebrum is divided into, the outer part of the cerebrum is called as the cerebral cortex, and the inner part of the cerebrum is called as the cerebral medulla. So now the question is, the multipolar neurons are present. Actually, the cerebral cortex contains the multipolar neurons. So in the embryonic stage, we find unipolar neurons. In the spinal cord also we find neurons, maybe it is myelinated or non-myelinated. So they might be multipolar, myelinated, or non-myelinated, but the multipolar neurons are present in the cerebral cortex in abundant. So when we compare the cerebral cortex has got abundant of multipolar neurons when compared to spinal cord. And finally, eyes has got bipolar neurons. So moving on to the next question. The unmyelinated nerve fibers are found in, particularly they are abundant in the cranial and the spinal nerves. So cerebral cortex we have already dealt, spinal cord, embryonic stage, all we have come across. Myelinated and non-myelinated. Myelinated, if the neural membrane is, the axonal membrane is covered by a sheath of carbohydrate called as myelin, then you call it as myelinated nerve fiber. If that myelin is absent, then you call it as unmyelinated nerve fibers. So myelinated nerve fibers are once again present in the cerebral cortex, and unmyelinated are present in the cranial and spinal nerves. And now moving on to the question number 145. Unipolar neuron has. So the unipolar neuron has telodendria, one cell body and one dendrite, one axon and one dendrite, cell body and one axon. So unipolar neuron. So neurons are classified into three types: the unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar. Unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar. So usually unipolar, it will contain cyton, it will contain one cell body and one dendrite, one axon and one dendrite, cell body and one axon. So one cell body and one axon, cyton and axon are present, then you call it as unipolar. So bipolar, you have the cyton and one dendrite, you call it as bipolar. Multipolar, so I have told you this axon itself is the longest dendrite, and hence in unipolar the cyton has got one axon, that itself is unipolar. So bipolar, one axon and one dendrite, cyton along with axon and dendrite plus axon, you call it as bipolar. And in multipolar there are many dendrites. Like the one which I had written the diagram earlier. So the answer is the one cell body, one axon, cell body and one axon. Cell body and one axon. Next, moving on to the next question, 146. Neurons are excitable because, so membranes are semi-permeable, membranes are made up of lipoproteins, membranes are impermeable, membranes are polarized. Neurons are excitable because membranes are semi-permeable, membranes are made up of lipoproteins, membranes are impermeable, membranes are polarized. So the right answer for the question is membranes are polarized. So the axonal membrane, the neurons consists of the axon. So axon I have written in a horizontal manner. So if this is an axonal membrane, so inside it contains negative charges, more of negative charges, and outside this axonal membrane it contains more of positive charges, and hence you can call it as polarized. Hence you can call it as a polarized neuron, and therefore it is excitable. It receives any stimulus and immediately there is a reversal of the polarity. Reversal of the polarity can be seen. Moving on to the next question. Question number 147. The ionic gradients across the resting membrane is maintained by. So none of these: diffusion, active transport, sodium and potassium ion pumps. So the ionic gradients across the resting membrane. Say if this is the neural membrane, this is the axon of the neuron. So now because none of the impulses are passing on this membrane, then you call it as resting membrane. You call this as resting membrane, which has got resting potential. Which has got resting potential. The potential difference, resting membrane and resting potential. So the potential difference that is found on a axonal membrane, which is not transmitting any impulses or it is not conducting any impulse, then you call it as a resting membrane, and the charges present on it can be called as resting potential. The polarity present on that resting membrane can be called as resting potential. So this resting potential is maintained, the ionic gradients across the resting membrane is maintained by the movement of sodium 3Na plus from inside to outside and 2K plus moving inside from outside to inside. Thus the polarity or the ionic gradients are maintained across the resting membrane with the help of the sodium potassium ion pumps. Therefore, moving on to the next question, question number 148. So the question is, the exoplasm inside contains negatively charged proteins, high concentration of Na plus. Second option, negatively charged proteins, high concentration of K plus and less concentration of Na plus. Third option, negatively charged proteins. Fourth option, negatively charged proteins, high concentration of Na plus and less concentration of K plus. So if this is the axonal membrane, inside it you call it as the exoplasm. So now what is he telling? He is telling the exoplasm inside contains. So this exactly contains more of K plus ions, less number of Na plus ions, and which is rich, increased number of negatively charged ions. So inside the exoplasm, what we find? Potassium ions in excess, Na plus less number of Na plus ions, and negatively charged proteins are also present in high concentration in the exoplasm. Therefore, the answer is negatively charged proteins, high concentration of K plus and less concentration of Na plus will be the right answer. So moving on to the next question, question number 149. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called. So I have already told, if this is the axonal membrane I have written, which in the horizontal form. Usually you find in the textbook, this is the axonal membrane and this is the cyton, right? This is the cyton. So I have written this part, I have expanded this part, I have written horizontally. So this is the this is the axonal membrane. So axonal membrane, here it is referring to plasma membrane. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane. When this axon is not conducting any of the impulses, then you call this membrane, this axonal membrane is at rest, or it is at it is a resting membrane. It is a resting membrane. And in the resting membrane, the potential difference you find, the potential difference is the electrical potential, the difference in the charges, the plus and minus charges, you call it as electrical potential difference. So that difference, potential difference, is called as resting potential difference. So when impulses are passing, when the impulses are conducted through this membrane, then you call it as action potentials generated. Fine. So moving on to the question number 150. The transmission of impulses is always faster in both chemical synapses and electrical synapses. Second is electrical synapses. The third is none. And the fourth is chemical synapses. So the answer is electrical synapses. The answer is electrical synapses. So what exactly happens is, so there are two types of synapses. One is called as the chemical synapse and the other is called as the electrical synapse. So if the synaptic knob in it contains certain synaptic vesicles, and these synaptic vesicles in them, they contain certain chemicals which are called as neurotransmitters. So if the synapse is carried out with the help of these neurotransmitters, then you call it as chemical synapses. So if there is continuous, there is a very near proximity and the electrical impulses pass continuously, therefore the electrical synapses are very fast when compared to chemical synapses. So in chemical synapses, what happens is they have to enter from the presynaptic membrane, they have to enter into the synaptic cleft. From there, they have to move to the postsynaptic membrane. Therefore, it is slow, whereas electrical synapses, that is flow of electrical charges, is usually very fast, is very fast. So the answer is electrical synapses are faster than chemical synapses. Moving on to the next question, question number 152. 151. The transmission of impulses at the chemical synapses are brought about by. The transmission of impulses at the chemical synapses are brought about by. So chemical synapses, I have told you already, transmitters bring about, neurotransmitters bring about the chemical synapses. So neurotransmitters, there are varieties of neurotransmitters present in the human body. So we have the neurotransmitters like acetylcholine. So just let me, you people look into the question. So transmission of impulses at the chemical synapses are brought about by. The answer is neurotransmitters. The other options are facilitated transmitters, polarity of membranes, hormones. So neurotransmitters, there are varieties of neurotransmitters. So there is GABA, there is acetylcholine, there is noradrenaline or the epinephrine, it is also called as. So different types of neurotransmitters. So we have acetylcholine, GABA, it is gamma aminobutyric acid. Gamma aminobutyric acid, then epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, histamine. So all these are various types of neurotransmitters that we find in the body. So dopamine, not written, dopamine, histamine, then also nitric oxide, then glycine. All these are various neurotransmitters that can be seen in our body. So facilitated transport, which is carried out by carrier proteins. Polarity of membranes, I have told you, because they carry opposite charges in and outside the axonal membrane. Hormones, you know, they are chemicals secreted from the endocrine glands. So moving on to the question number 152. The binding of neurotransmitters to the specific receptors. The binding of neurotransmitters to the specific receptors. The options are none of these. Second one, opens ion channels on the postsynaptic membrane. Third one, opens ion channels on the presynaptic membrane. Fourth is helps movement of vesicles. So I have told you, I had written the diagram earlier. Let me repeat that diagram. So we have the synaptic knob, which is the part of the chilodendria or the terminal end of the axonal membrane, containing enfoldings like this, and these are neurotransmitters, which in them contains the chemicals called as neurotransmitters. These are the vesicles containing the neurotransmitters. When there is an impulse coming over here to the part of the telodendria, these neurotransmitters move towards these enfoldings. They merge, both of them merge together. So these neurotransmitters are released into this part, and from here it is released into the synaptic cleft. From the synaptic cleft, this is the postsynaptic membrane. So this is the postsynaptic membrane. The receptors present on the postsynaptic membrane, these neurotransmitters, they bind to the receptors which are present on this is the presynaptic membrane. This is the synaptic cleft. And these are the receptors. This is the postsynaptic membrane, and these are the receptors. So now look at the question. The binding of the neurotransmitters to the specific receptors, opens. So when this comes and sticks or binds to the receptors of the postsynaptic membrane, so the ionic channels which are present on the postsynaptic membrane, so various ionic channels are present on the axonal membrane like this, and there is the opening of the ionic channels, so that it brings about the influx and afflux of the polarity. So therefore, the ionic channels present on the postsynaptic membrane, they open up, and therefore the answer is option 2. So moving on to question number 153. The order of cranial meninges are. So meninges, what is meninges? So meninges is a tough covering around the brain and the spinal cord. Meninges is nothing but the tough covering of the brain and the spinal cord, and this meninges is of 3 layers. The outer dura mater, the middle arachnoid matter, and inner pia mater. Outer dura mater, middle arachnoid matter, and inner pia matter. So we have dura matter, arachnoid matter, and pia matter in the option number 4. So I'll come to that later. So this is outermost, middle, and inner. In between you have subdural space. We have the subdural space. There is some space in between the two layers, the dura mater and the arachnoid matter, which is called as subdural space. And there is a space between the arachnoid matter and the pion matter, which is called as subarachnoid space. Arachnoid space. It is called as subarachnoid space, subdural space, right? So the right answer is dura mater, arachnoid matter, pia mater is the right answer. So moving on to question number 154. The two cerebral hemispheres are connected by nerve fibers called. See, the whole of the cerebrum, we have cerebrum, this and this part is called as the cerebrum. So this cerebrum has been divided into two lobes, the right and left cerebral hemispheres we call it as. We call it as right and left cerebral hemispheres, and the two are divided with the help of a longitudinal fissure, deep longitudinal fissure, right? So this cerebral hemispheres are connected. So this part of the cerebrum and this part of the cerebrum both are internally connected with the help of a tract of nerve fibers, and that is called as corpus callosum. It is called as corpus callosum. And we have some other options like cerebral aqueduct, crura cerebri and commissures. So cerebral aqueduct and crura cerebri, both of them are parts of middle brain. So midbrain consists of the cerebral aqueduct and the crura cerebri. Both of them are the parts of the midbrain. So cerebral aqueduct and the, so it is a narrow canal. Cerebral aqueduct is the narrow canal which comes out of the what is called as the midbrain, and crura cerebri is the one which will connect the ventricles or the cavities of the brain. The third and fourth ventricles are connected with the help of the crura cerebri, and this crura cerebri is also called as cerebral peduncles. It is also called as cerebral peduncles. Crura cerebri is also called as cerebral peduncles. So they are the parts of the midbrain. Commissures, they are canals of nerve tracts, nerve fibers. Moving on to question number 155. The cerebral cortex is referred as gray matter because, so the cerebral cortex, I have told you already, cerebrum, the outer part of the cerebrum is made up of 6 layers of nerve fibers, which is called as cerebral cortex. And this is called as the gray matter because, why it is called as gray matter? Because it consists of the cell body of the neuron or concentrated in this in the cortex. The cell body of the neuron, the cerebral cortex is referred as gray matter because the cell body of the neuron are concentrated in the cerebral cortex, that is option 4. So in the cortex there are cell body. You know the cell body is nothing but the axon, and this axon, the cell body is the cyton, and this cyton in it contains the mesial granules. So I have told you this. So this is called as the cyton and this is called as the axon, and in this part we have the mesial granules, so which contribute to this gray, a little bit of grayish color, and hence the cell body of the neuron are concentrated in the cerebral cortex. So moving on to question number 156. The association areas of the cerebral cortex are responsible for. So the association areas of the cerebral cortex are responsible for. So there are 4 important functions given over there. Seat of intelligence, reflex actions, memory and communication, emotions. So the right answer is memory and communication. So we have different areas in the cerebral cortex like the motor areas, sensory areas and the association areas. The cerebral cortex is made up of 3 areas. The sensory areas, the motor areas and the association areas. So sensory areas, motor and association areas. So sensory areas receive the impulse from the sensory organs. Motor neurons, they take the impulses from the CNS towards the muscles, and association areas, they make an analysis of the stimulus that has been received through the sense organs. So this association areas is the areas which are responsible for memory and communication. Memory and communication. So the seat of intelligence is the cerebrum itself. The reflex actions are carried out by spinal cord because they have specifically asked the association areas of the cerebral cortex. Therefore, we are going with the answer memory and communication. Even seat of intelligence is also one of the responsible portion of cerebral cortex itself. But still, they are in particular, they are telling about the association areas. Therefore, we are going to memory and communication. So emotions, they are part of the limbic system. They are part of the limbic system. So seat of intelligence, cerebrum, reflex action, spinal cord, memory and communication is the association areas of the cerebral cortex, and emotions is for limbic system or the limbic lobe we have in the brain. So moving on to question number 157. The part of the brain that has neurosecretory cells. So the neurosecretory cells are present in the hypothalamus, and cerebrum, as we know, it is the largest part of the human brain, and it is a part of the forebrain, and it is the seat of intelligence, memory, then learning, and so many such other intricate activities. So thalamus, thalamus is the innermost part of the brain, and it connects the forebrain and the hindbrain. Hypothalamus, so below the thalamus we have the hypothalamus, and this is the one which will control the entire endocrine system of our body, and it will control with the help of the secretions from the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus. Therefore, the answer is hypothalamus. And cerebellum. Cerebellum is involved in controlling various voluntary actions. Next, moving on to question 158. The reflex action is. So we have studied that reflex action as one of the illustration of spinal cord. So we have studied the knee jerk movement. So the reflex action is involuntary and without consciousness. Reflex action is involuntary and without consciousness. The second option is none of these. Third is belated response to stimuli, and the fourth is voluntary. So the reflex action is involuntary without consciousness. So the reflex action is carried out by various type of neurons, group of neurons. There are afferent pathways, afferent path is from the that is from the sense organs to afferent pathways, then to integrated centers, from the integrated center to efferent pathways, from efferent pathways to effectors or the muscles. So sense organs, or you can also call it as the receptors. So this is the pathway of this reflex action. ರಿಫ್ಲೆಕ್ಸ್ ಆಕ್ಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನನ್ನ ಕಣ್ಣು ಮುಂದೆ ಒಂದು ನೊಣಾನೋ ಅಥವಾ ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರು ಫ್ಲೈ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಇಮಿಡಿಯೇಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಕಣ್ಣು ಮುಚ್ಕೋತೀನಿ ಅಥವಾ ಹಿಂಗಂತೀನಿ. ಸೊ ಅದು ನಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿದ್ದು ಮಾಡುವಂಥದ್ದಲ್ಲ, ಆಟೋಮೆಟಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ನಾವು ಮಾಡುವಂಥದ್ದು, ವಿತೌಟ್ ಎನಿ ಕಾನ್ಷಿಯಸ್ನೆಸ್ ದಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್ like this. So this is what is called as involuntary and without consciousness it happens. And so while doing this video class also we'll be doing so many involuntary actions without any conscious. So all that you can call it as reflex action, and all the reflex action is passed from the sense organs to the afferent pathways or receptors to the afferent pathways, and from afferent pathways to integrated centers, from there to effector pathways, and finally to the muscles of our body. So this is the pathway of the reflex action. Next, moving on to the next question 159. So that concludes 22 questions coming from the chapter Neural Control and Coordination. Now moving on to the questions from the chapter Organisms and Populations, right? So many freshwater organisms cannot live for long in seawater because the surrounding water will be dash to body cells and dash may occur. So now the question is, so when a freshwater fish, can you imagine a freshwater organism lives in the freshwater, and that freshwater consists of less of salt content in it. So obviously it cannot live long in seawater. In seawater, because the salinity or the salt content is, the salt concentration is very high when compared to the freshwater. So it cannot survive there. Why? Because the surrounding water will be, usually when you put the water in the sea water is hypertonic when compared to the fresh water. So you can fill that blank with hypertonic to body cells, and when the cells are surrounded by hypertonic medium, usually what happens, water from the cell gets out of the cell. So thereby shrinkage of the protoplast takes place and there is exosmosis. So exosmosis is movement of water from inside the cell to outwards, from the cells to outside medium. You call it as exosmosis. So the cells are present in the hypertonic medium. So obviously the body cells shows exosmosis and there is a shrinkage of the protoplast, thereby bringing the organisms to death, crushing them towards the death. So moving on to the next question, question number 160. The plants growing on saline soil are called as. So the plants that grow on the saline soil are called as halophytes is the right answer. The other options are xerophytes. So plants growing in the xeric conditions, that is where there is less amount of water, you call it as xeric conditions. Saline water, that is the soil which is rich in salts, you call it as saline soil, and which is and the plants growing there are called as halophytes. Usually the surrounding areas of a seashore, you call them as saline soil, and plants growing there are referred as halophytes. Xerophytes, so plants growing the xeric conditions, that where there is less amount of water or inadequate amount of water. Hydrophytes are those plants which grow in the water, and heliophytes are those plants which have an affinity for sunlight, which have a sun. They are also called as sunstroke plants. They are also referred as sunstroke plants. They are also referred as heliophytes, or which requires plenty of sunlight, which demands plenty of sunlight. So moving on to question number 161. Sunken stomata are found in. What do you mean by this word sunken stomata? So the options are xerophytes, hydrophytes, halophytes and mesophytes. So xerophytes, hydrophytes, halophytes and mesophytes. Sunken stomata. So you know any leaf has got, the stomata are usually present on the leaf surface, right? So the leaf surface has got two surfaces. One is called as the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis, right? Upper epidermis and lower epidermis. Lower epidermis. Or if this is the upper epidermis. So if the stomata is present in this depression, it is present in this depression, you call this as sunken stomata. So because it is not directly getting exposed to the surface, so transpiration is prevented. So where do you want to prevent the transpiration? That is, transpiration is loss of water. In which plants do you want to prevent the loss of water? Absolutely, those plants which are living in xeric condition. So the answer is xerophytes. The answer is xerophytes. So this is one of the adaptation which is found in the xerophytes for the prevention of aerial exchange of water from, aerial loss of water. Aerial loss of water. So moving on to question number 162. The maximum population size that an environment can support is called. ಒಂದು population ಅಲ್ಲಿ maximum of individuals ಅದು ಹಿಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಕ್ಕೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇದೆ ಅದನ್ನ you call it as carrying capacity. We call that as the carrying capacity. Any population that can hold maximum number of individuals in the environment can be called as the carrying capacity. So carrying capacity is the word which we have come across in logistic growth model. So we have studied two important growth models. One is called as the exponential growth model and the other is called as the showing with a S-shaped curve, that is the logistic growth curve, or it is also called as Wurst logistic growth curve. It is also called as, which is of S-shaped. There we come across this word called as the carrying capacity. So maximum number of individuals the environment can hold, the maximum population size that an environment can support with all the resources, you call that as the carrying capacity. So moving on to question number 163. So which of the following would necessarily decrease the density of a population in a given habitat? So population size itself is called as the population density. The population size itself is called as the population density. So population density keeps changing. The fluctuation population density is due to four important factors. Four important factors. One is natality. Second is mortality. Third is immigration. And the fourth is emigration. So these are the factors which fluctuate the population density of a habitat. So in a given habitat, the population size never stays the same. It is not a constant. Population density is not a constant. It keeps fluctuating. So what are those factors which fluctuate the population density? These are the four important factors, and among them they are asking which are going to decrease the density of the population. The one which is going to decrease the population, or one is mortality and the other is emigration. In mortality, there is death of individuals. There is a death of individuals in a given area in a particular period of time. There is death of individuals which will decrease the population size, and emigration. So some of the organisms, some of the individuals have left the habitat and gone, some of the individuals have left the habitat and gone elsewhere. You call that as emigration. Both of them will reduce the number of individuals in that particular habitat. Therefore, the one which decreases the population density, or one is mortality and emigration. So option 2 is the right answer. So moving on to question number 164. Competitive exclusion principle stating that inferior species, stating that inferior species is eliminated eventually after prolonged competition was given by. So competitive exclusion principle we have studied under competition. So organisms and populations ಅಲ್ಲಿ competition ಅನ್ನೋ topic ಅಲ್ಲಿ we have studied competitive exclusion principle ಅಂತ ಓದಿದೀವಿ. So according to that, the inferior species will be eliminated. So when there is a continuous interaction between the closely related species, the competitively superior one will be there, but the inferior one will get extinct or will be eliminated from that particular habitat. So that was given by Gauss. This competitive exclusion principle was given by the scientist called as Gauss. And who are the other scientists? Norman Borlaug is the name of one the scientist given over there. Alan. So Pearl Wurst. So Allen and Pearl Wurst you know very well because we have the famous Allen's rule. So which tells that mammals in colder regions have longer limbs and ears. So which is Allen's rule. And Pearl Wurst, the logistic growth curve we have studied. The logistic growth curve was given by Pearl Wurst, and Norman Borlaug is called as an agronomic scientist. He is an American agronomic scientist who was doing various research to increase the productivity or increase the production of the food crops. So here the answer is Gauss. Moving on to question number 165, exponential growth is observed in a population when? Exponential growth. So we have studied exponential growth. If this is the graph we are plotting for the exponential growth, this is the time and this is the population density, capital N. So exponential growth like this, it is a J-shaped curve. So exponential growth, when the resources are unlimited, so the growth goes on, continuously goes on increasing, which you call it as exponential growth, and that is observed in a population where resources in the habitat are unlimited. That is not possible. If the resources are abundant, then only the growth can continuously increase. Otherwise, it cannot. Therefore, first one cannot be the answer. Second one, both resources in the habitat are unlimited and each species has the ability to realize its full innate potential. So that means each species has the ability to realize its full innate potential, is referring to something called as the fitness, right? Then each species has the ability to realize its full innate potential, none of these. So here exponential growth is observed in a population when there is resources, both resources in the habitat are unlimited and each species has the ability to realize its full innate potential. Resources in the habitat are limited, then exponential growth cannot occur. When there is unlimited resources, exponential growth can happen. So first one is also the answer, second one is also answer, first one has been included in the second, so we will go with second one as the answer. Both resources in the habitat are unlimited and the species has also got that reproductive fitness so that it has the capacity to increase its progeny, right? So second one is the right answer. Moving on to the question number 166. Killing an organism for feeding is? So any organism that kills other organism. So that is a type of population interaction. What do you call it as? Population interaction we call it as. So there are different types of population interactions, and this is also one type of interaction where one organism kills the other organism. The one which kills is called as the predator. The one which is killed is called as prey. So usually predators kill and eat the prey, right? So this is a type of negative. This is also called as negative population interaction, where one organism is benefited and the other organism is harmed. So this type of relationship is called as predation. So even parasitism is one such relationship where there is negative population interaction. It can be called because one is benefited and the other is harmed. The parasite and the host relationship. The host is harmed whereas the parasite is benefited. In commensalism, so one is benefited and the other is neither benefited nor harmed. That you call it as commensalism. The best example for commensalism can be an epiphyte, a small ornamental plant growing on a tree, right? We find so many orchids growing on trees like mango tree or tamarind tree. So that is an example for commensalism. And symbiosis, you also call it as mutualism, where the interacting organisms both are benefited, then we call it as symbiosis. So the right answer, killing an organism for feeding, is predation. Moving on to question number 167. Which of the following is an incorrect match? Which of the following is an incorrect match? Bacteria, thick-walled resting spores, bear, hibernation, lizard, estivation, zooplankton, diapause. So here, bacteria, thick-walled resting spores, bear, hibernation, lizard, estivation. So here, bacteria, thick-walled resting spores, bear, hibernation, zooplanktons, diapauses are correct matches. Whereas lizard and estivation is a incorrect match. So all the three, bacteria, thick-walled resting spores, zooplanktons, diapause, bear, hibernation are examples of suspension. So there are various ways organisms respond to the environmental conditions. See, environmental conditions are always not constant. Yesterday it was raining and today it is very hot. So this is what you can see the variation in the environmental factors. So organisms have to respond to this environmental conditions. So in different ways, some of them they regulate, some of them they conform, some of them they migrate, and some of them they suspend. So these are examples of suspension. They escape with time. So when there is unfavorable condition for bacteria, they will develop some thick-walled resting spores, and they try those resting spores. They are used for they germinate when the conditions are favorable for them. When the condition is favorable for them. So bear will undergo hibernation. Hibernation is nothing but the winter sleep. When it cannot tolerate too coldness, so it will go to a phase of inactivity called as hibernation. Lizard will never go to estivation. Instead, lizard will show camouflage. Some of the lizards show camouflage to escape from the enemies. So it is not estivation. So zooplanktons, diapause. Once again, there is suspended body activity is called as diapause, which can be seen in case of zooplanktons. So moving on to question number 168. After exponential increase, population becomes stagnant. The growth curve is. So it is somewhat a very unrelated question, but still, let us see. Exponential. After exponential increase. So there is an increase. And then it is going for, the question tells then it is going for stagnation. Then it is going for stagnation, right? So stagnation, it is going to be stagnant here and it is going to for a phase of stagnation. Then the growth curve will be almost S-shaped, right? Therefore, it is almost the logistic growth curve, so which is nothing but S-shaped. And moving on to the next question, question number 169. 3 water bodies were tested for salinity of water. Water body X showed salt concentration as 3 parts per 1000. Y showed 35 parts per 1000 and Z showed 110 parts per 1000 salinity. So select the correct option. So let us list what they are trying to tell. X has got a salt concentration. X has got a salt concentration 3 per 1000. 3 parts per 1000, right? 3 parts per 1000. Y is showing 35 parts per 1000 and Z is showing how much? 110 parts per 1000, right? So this is the salinity, the concentration of salinity in different waters. So now look into the option and try to answer this question. Z can be an inland river. Z is this one. This can be an inland river. No, it is not at all possible because the salinity is 110 parts per 1000. Therefore, it is not at all possible. And second is X can be a hypersaline lagoon. So X 3 ppt and a hypersaline lagoon will have more than 100 ppt. Therefore, this is also not matching. Then Y can be a C. So Y 35 ppt. Yes, it is saline water. It is the C. So third one, Y can be a C is the right match to the question. Therefore, we are going with third one. Moving on to the next question. It can be said that some animals in their evolutionary development prefer to be conformers than regulators. Which of the following can be the best suited reason for it? So, I was telling something about the conformers and regulators. See, regulators, we are ourselves are called as regulators because we tend to regulate the body temperature. So, with the regulation of body temperature is irrespective of the environmental temperature, our body remains constant, will have a constant body temperature. If it is too hot outside, then also our body temperature will be 37 degree, or if it is too cold inside, then also our body temperature will be 37 degrees Celsius itself. So it is constant. So this is maintained along with the environment, and this is called as regulation. We regulate. So when there is excess of temperature, we start sweating. Therefore, the water molecules, they get deposited on the surface of the body and the body temperature is brought down and maintained constant. So whereas in times of winter, if our body is shivering, so then lot of heat is produced and the body temperature is brought back to the normal 37 degree, or homeostasis is maintained in such a way in case of regulators. But in conformers, they simply conform, they do not go for regulation, they simply maintain their body temperature almost similar to that of the external body, external or the environmental temperature, or if they are aquatic organism, the same salt concentration which is outside the body is maintained in the inside the body also. So now the question is, the metabolic reactions of these organisms can occur at a wide range of temperature. So we have studied two important words, eurythermal and stenothermal, right? So he is telling that these organisms, conformers or eurythermal, he is telling. So it cannot be eurythermal because eurythermal, there are only a small amount of organisms which are eurythermal, which can survive in a wide range of temperature. So conformers cannot occur in a very wide range of temperature. It is not possible. Maintaining homeostasis is an energetically expensive process. So this is also, of course, it is expensive, and therefore conformers will not go with this process of maintaining homeostasis. The enzymes of these organisms are functional at high temperature. So the metabolic reactions of these organisms occur at a wide range of temperature. Yes, at wide temperature of temperatures, whatever, irrespective of the temperature, it just conforms. Therefore, this is a suitable statement. Maintaining homeostasis is an energetically expensive process is also right. So the enzymes of these organisms are functional at high temperature. This is also, this cannot be the answer. The answer for both B and C. So according to me, the answer is 2, 3 and 4. The answer is 2, 3 and 4. So the enzymes of these organisms are functional at high temperature. We cannot go with this. Only first, second is suited for conformers. So which is both B and C in case, which is both B and C in case of fourth one. Sorry, the metabolic reactions cannot occur in a wide range of temperature, but the enzymes of these organisms are functional at high temperature. So they can maintain, they just conform. Therefore, B and C are correct. That is 2 and 3 are correct. Therefore, 2, 3 and 4 will be the right answer for this question. Moving on to question number 172. Ice nucleating proteins and extra solutes in the body builds body fluids enable ice fish and Antarctic fish to remain active at a temperature below 0 degree centigrade. So we don't know the exact temperature, but we know something like where there is ice, that is, and also in Antarctic there is high amount of there is very low temperature which might be below 0 degree centigrade. So all the others are also below 0 degree. Therefore, we will go with the general answer of below 0 degree centigrade is the right answer. Moving on to question number 172. Cactoblastis is used as a biological control of. So cactoblastosis is a moth. Cactoblastis is a moth which will predate or which will eat the cactus. So cactus is eaten by the cactoblastis. This is referring to one of the incident which took place in Australia long back, when cactus was planted or the opuntia was planted in Australia. It grew in such an excessive manner, so further it was to be controlled by its own predatory organisms. So later Cactoblastis moth was released and they controlled the population of the cactus or the opuntia. Cactus is also called as opuntia is the right answer. So the other options, mosquito larvae, red ants. So mosquito larvae, they can be controlled by various other means like mosquito nets or repellents or anything like that. And red ants, they can also be controlled by the various chemical methods. And Parthenium has got a biological control method. So Parthenium has got the biological control where it is, the Parthenium is eaten by Mexican beetle. So earlier in India it was a great menace, Parthenium, because it can grow in a very sporadic way. It is also called as Congress Gida anta karitar kannadadalli. So Parthenium. So this was growing sporadically and its population had increased to such an extent and it was causing a lot of allergies also, the pollen grains. Therefore, it was finally eradicated by releasing the Mexican beetles which predated on these plants. So moving on to question number 173. If a population of 50 paramecium present in a pool increased to 150 after an hour, what would be the growth rate of the population? So growth rate is 100 per hour. So in a span of just 1 hour, so earlier number was 50 and in just a span of 1 hour it has increased to 150. The rate of increase is nothing but 100 per hour. So rate of increase is 100 per hour, the growth rate of the population. So the question is growth rate of the population, therefore 100 per hour is the growth rate of the paramecium. Moving on to the next question, question number 174. A population has more young individuals compared to older individuals. What would be the status of the population after some years? So after some years, it will first, the options are, it will first decline and then stabilize. It will decline, it will stabilize, it will increase. So obviously there will be an increase in the population size because next in the future generations, the young individuals which are more in number will enter into the reproductive phase and they are going to reproduce, and therefore there will be an increase in the population, and it is type of pyramid, an expanding type of age pyramid it is representing. It is representing an expanding type of age pyramid. So if this is pre-reproductive individuals, we call it as the younger individuals, pre-reproductive individuals they are. So these are reproductive individuals, and with this they are post-reproductive individuals, So the one which are in the pre-reproductive individuals or the younger ones, they are large in number, hence they will next enter into the reproductive phase where their population, where they will increase the population in the future years. So moving on to the next question, 175. What parameters are used for tiger census in our country's national parks and sanctuaries? So tiger census, to find out the population density. So population density can be found out in different ways. Approximate calculations are done, absolute calculations are done, relative calculations are done. But here only without seeing without seeing the organism or without making a count of the organism, by looking at some of the features or looking at some of the impressions, we take a count of the organisms. Usually the tiger census is done, the count of tiger in a park, national park, is done with the help of pug marks and fecal pallets. Pug marks is the ಅದರ ಗೊರಸಿನ ಗುರುತು, ಕಾಲುಗಳು, ಕಾಲ್ ಅಥವಾ ಪಾಸ್ ಅಂತ ಏನು ಕರಿತೀರಾ ನೀವು, ಪಗ್, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಆಸ್ ಪಗ್ ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಫೀಕಲ್ ಪ್ಯಾಲೆಟ್ಸ್. ಅದ್ರ ಕಾಲಿನ ಗುರುತು ಮತ್ತೆ ಫೀಕಲ್ ಪ್ಯಾಲೆಟ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ವಿ ಡಿಸೈಡ್ ಹೌ ಮೆನಿ ನಂಬರ್ ಆಫ್ ಟೈಗರ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಇನ್ ದಟ್ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ habitat. So moving on to question number 176, we have matched the following. So different types of interactions and the nature of interactions between species A and B are given in columns 1 and 2 respectively. Choose the correct answer from the answer key where they are matched. So first one is mutualism. So mutualism can be matched with beneficial to both A and B is Q. So look into AQ. So this is third one is matching AQ. Second is competition. In competition, what happens? Both harmful to both A and B it can be. Then because if there are two competitors A and B, sometimes A inhibits B and sometimes B inhibits A. Therefore, it can be called like harmful to both A and B. Therefore, a BT, yes, AQ, BT, both are right matches in option 3. And third one, that is C, is parasitism. In parasitism, one is harmed and one is benefited. So beneficial to A, no effect for B. Beneficial, there's one more. Beneficial to A and harmful for B. And there's one more, beneficial. So beneficial to A and inhibitory for B. So one is getting inhibited. So in case of parasitism, what happens? One is benefited. Parasitism is a relationship between two interacting individuals. One is called as the host and the other is called as the parasite. So parasite is of course benefited because it is completely dependent upon the host for its food and shelter. It is benefited, whereas the host, it is inhibited. It may get sick or its growth may be inhibited, or sometimes it may also end with a death. So therefore, beneficial to A and inhibitory for B can be matched, CR. And moving on to predation. In predation, beneficial to A and harmful to B. So D and S, both are on the same line, so it is a right match. Commensalism. So beneficial to A and no effect for B. One will be benefited and the other will not have any benefit. Neither it is benefited nor it is under any loss or harm. Therefore, the right match is option 3. AQ, BT, CR, DS and EP is the right match. Moving on to question number 177. The number of individuals of the population who left the habitat and gone elsewhere during the time period is called. So, immigration, natality, immigration, emigration and migration. So, the right answer is emigration. So, natality is the birth rate. So, some individuals are added to the population. Natality is birth rate where individuals take their birth. So, there is an increase in the population size and some individuals are added to the habitat. So immigration, in immigration, organisms come to the habitat from elsewhere, you call it as immigration. Emigration, some of the individuals leave the habitat and go elsewhere. So that is called as emigration and migration. So in both emigration and mortality, there is a decrease in the population. So the number of individuals of the population who left the habitat and gone elsewhere during the time is emigration. So moving on to question number 178. Which statement is false regarding predators? If a predator is not prudent, the prey population will become extinct. Obviously, it's a right statement. Predators keep prey population under control. Obviously, predators keep prey population and control. If predators are not present, like if the tiger and lion are not present, the deer population will increase to such an extent that it will create a ecological imbalance. Therefore, predators keep prey population under control is absolutely right. If predator is not prudent, the prey population will become extinct. True. So if the predators are not prudent and if they start over exploiting the prey, obviously the prey organism will get extinct, and in a very small span of time even the predators will get extinct. Therefore, usually predators are always prudent. Next, third one, herbivores have a greater advantage. So in case of predation, herbivores are the one which are more affected with this, because they are going to be affected. They have to develop, the predators will exploit the herbs for as their food. So they are not having any advantage, but they are the most exploited. Therefore, this is a false statement. Predators help in maintaining species diversity in a community. Of course, that is also absolutely right statement. So the statement that is false is herbivores have a greater advantage. No, they are not having any advantage. Instead, they are at the most threat of the predators. So moving on to question number 179. So there is a graphical representation given here, and the question asked is, what do A, B and C represent in the given diagram? So we have the graphical representation where the x-axis consists of time, and one y-axis we have population or the population density, and there is an S-shaped curve, a curve resembling S shape has been given on there, and the initial part of the S part is A, the extended part is B, the end part of S is called as C. So the first initial, the graph is showing an initial lag phase which is increasing slowly, and there is a rapid increase, and finally it is getting slowed down, and therefore the right option is lag phase, log phase, and finally entering into a phase of stationary. So lag, log and stationary is the right answer for the given question, and that is the answer. Option 3 is the right answer for the given question. Moving on to the last question. The interdependent evolution of flowering plants and pollinating insects together is known as the interdependent evolution. So evolution of flowering plants, interdependent means evolution of flowering plants is dependent upon the pollinating insects, and the evolution of pollinating insects is dependent upon the flowering plants. This is the meaning of it. So together is known as, see, plants and insects have a very intricate relationship where that both of them are mutually benefited, right? So it is one of the example of mutualism. Flowering plants render nectar to the insects, or even fruits and seeds to the insects. At the same time, the pollinating insects will help in bring about the pollination of the flowering plant. So unless there is pollination and dispersal of the seeds, so there will be no continuity of the progeny for the plants. Therefore, interdependent. If flowering plants undergo little bit of changes, correspondingly certain changes has to take place in the pollinating insects. Otherwise, because both of them are interdependent, otherwise one will get extinct because they will not have a pollinator. The flowering plants may not have a pollinator, nor the pollinating insects may not have their food. So for these reasons, both have to undergo evolution simultaneously, which is called as co-evolution, the interdependent evolution. So one more example we had studied, that is of Ophrys and Mediterranean orchid. That is also a very, very important aspect. If orchid is, Ophrys is the only plant, is the plant which is getting pollinated only by bees, right? So particular type of bees. So these bees, if the orchid plant undergoes evolution, the bee should also undergo evolutionary process. Otherwise, pollination cannot happen. One will get extinct. So the Ophrys will get extinct. So both have to co-evolve, as in the case of wasp and fig also. So fig is pollinated by wasp, and wasp lays its eggs in the fig itself, fig flowers itself. Therefore, both of them, if they evolve simultaneously, then they can survive. Otherwise, survival is not possible for them. So if both of them evolve simultaneously, we call it as co-evolution. Making a absolute counter evolution, we call it as co-evolution. So this is the last question of today's discussion. So we have discussed 45 questions. I hope you are happy with the answers given over there, or the explanation that has been given over there. And let me conclude this class. Keep studying, because you need to study for appearing for your competitive exams to get better ranks and get a seat. For your corresponding seat, you may have to work hard. Keep studying. That keeps you in progress. Have a nice day. Thank you.